Hello, everyone. Welcome to a session on accelerating time to insights using natural language. Today, we'll be talking about how Workday and other customers are using GenAI to get insights from data using natural language. The data could be structured, unstructured, or semi-structured data. I'm Diman Ghazi, MLI specialist at Google Cloud. And today I have with me Kevin Funkhauser. Kevin is a software architect at Workday focusing on bringing unique and engaging experience for enterprise ecosystem. We also have Kanch Patlola. Kanch is a technical solution manager at Google Cloud. She's focusing on software productivity and data engineering solutions on GenAI. With that, let's just get started with you, Kevin. Why don't you tell us about Workday, its mission, and your main customers?
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. So Workday is really focused on HR and finance. And so the goal is to help companies and organizations manage the two most important assets for any business, people and money. And so I think specifically today, we're going to be talking about Workday Extend. And so that's basically Workday has that core functionality, but because we service such a wide variety of industries and unique businesses, we need to allow them to basically go beyond the core parts of Workday and integrate their own unique solutions and their own business processes.
Yeah, makes sense. And I know, Kanch, you're working with a variety of customers. Would you say the solution that we'll be talking about is just unique to a particular vertical or industry, or it's broader than that?
It's a horizontal solution because the problem is the same with respect to extracting the data, creating the insights. So we work across the platform, whether it's any vertical, any size, all of them have similar challenges, and the pattern is almost the similar approaches, so we work with everyone.
And I know we have a limited time here, so we're going to dive into it right away. Kevin, tell us what you're building. Tell us about the solution.
Absolutely. So what we're really trying to build is a high-touch companion that is with a developer and a user like throughout their Extend's lifecycle. So that is when they're first learning about the product and like how do we get them past the tutorials and building real stuff. But then once they're building, how do we go beyond just typing out like endlessly, and how do instead get them working straight from natural language and into ways of like getting data and getting those insights immediately. And so that's kind of how we're pitching it, of like that companion that's with you every step of the way.
Right. And one common question that I always get is that this is not new. Like, databases, data has been there for a long time. And what has changed? How GenAI has reshaped the space of talking to data?
I think it's a convergence of two things which were happening. So one is when EF Cord was building the relationship database as rules itself, he always wanted it to be a natural language query against structured data. But what happened was we ended up with the strict rules of, with all these widths and joins and all of those statements which ended up evolving. But this space has been researched over the years. In fact, in 2017, Google released Data Q&A, a product in BigQuery, which was essentially the same principle of extracting, having a natural language query against structured data. But what happened in Q4 for 2022 for all of us is we were starting to ask questions against anything. So when that evolved, enterprises started becoming curious. They were like, okay, how do I bring my data? And enterprises most often have structured data. So how do I query against the structured data? How do I get more insights? How do I make it more consumable or more democratized towards my users? That's where this evolution came towards. So it's a mix of two paradigms, in my opinion.
And that's a great point. The fact that there was research for a long time. Like AlphaCode was one of those that they talked about, natural language to SQL. But it just took longer for it to be accessible. And with this advance in the Gen AI, it seems like now it's very accessible to all of us to get started. Yeah. But also, what would you say, who would be the main users of this solution, at least in your experience with the customers that you're working with?
So the way we are looking at is in two different phases. One is a data user who is probably data savvy, understands the schema, knows SQL, and can, identify the results and work with it. And those are the data analysts, data scientists, data engineers, all of those. And then there is another set of users who are the business users. And in the business users, they are in two categories. One is the ones with domain expertise, like say in Workday's case, probably employees' overtime hours. In that instance, it's an internal user who has domain expertise, doesn't understand more context of the schema, and doesn't understand SQL. And then there is this external consumer, like say you're against Shopify and you're asking, where's my order status? You don't know anything about the schema, you don't know anything about the table, and you are trying to query. So those are the different set of users and personas we are working when we are creating the solution.
And this is interesting. It seems like a little complementary to the personas that you were. You mentioned developers. Developer is a wide range. Can you elaborate a little bit more in terms of what types of developers that are helping your solution?
Absolutely. And I think anyone who's kind of worked on a platform or like basically serviced a platform for their users knows that you're going to get a super wide spectrum of like technical expertise and, as you say, business expertise. So I think especially for Workday Extend, we're kind of looking straight from like IT vendors. So they're basically in the customer IT team and they manage everything. So the Salesforce instance, the ServiceNow instance, the Workday instance, and just Workday Extend is one of the things they're doing. But we also go all the way to professional consultants and independent software vendors who are building highly complex solutions. And so we really want to service that extremely wide variety of users and help them all.
This is amazing. Hearing developers can benefit from this, data engineers, business users, like wide variety of anyone that wants to get insight from data, literally. So I know we would probably have technical audience here. And with that, I want to get to the architecture of your solution. Like, what are the main components of such a solution? What should you be even thinking about when you're building the solution, and some of the challenges that you face, but you've resolved it? If you can share that with us, Kevin.
Absolutely. So with a lot of these GenAI solutions, your specific business problems are really going to drive your architecture, not particularly in a unique way, but like one size fit all is probably not going to work. And for Workday's use case, Workday was built to service a really wide variety of industries and companies. What this means is that it has a very large data graph. And so that kind of was the main fulcrum for what we needed to work against as part of this solution. And so what we did is we kind of first said, okay, our problem is it's very large. Second, it's very complex, because not just is it large, but each of those industries needs specific configurations. And so that kind of naturally seeps into the data and API layer. It's a little bit unavoidable. And lastly, every single customer is going to have a different schema. As you are building these Extend apps, you're actually using native Workday components. So that means you're actually changing your data source inside your customer tenant as you're building these apps. And so in the frame of GenAI, this poses a problem. We can't just have a one-size-fits-all solution and say, oh, we have a few known good queries, let's just give them that. Instead, we actually took Gemini and kind of made it have a conversation with the graph schema. And so what that conversation is it basically says first, okay, my user has asked a question. First, I'm going to go look at all the data sources that Workday has, because we have student data sources, we have worker data sources, suppliers, etc. And so we need to actually narrow it down first. But even then, once we have a single data source, that actually, we can't stop there. It's still too large. Though I know, I've heard Gemini 1.5 Pro has a million-size token context. That could probably handle it, but again, we do want to keep it fast. And so at that point, what we do is we traverse that entire data graph to pluck out just the nodes that are going to be relevant for the user's query. And we pluck it out in such a way that we make sure that the schema stays valid. From there, we pass it on to a fine-tuned model. And so we fine-tuned it on exactly the shape and style that we're expecting for Workday graph queries. And so it's kind of that interesting interplay. We have the kind of foundation models are working for the most part, but then for the fine-tuned model, we target just the one like particular solution where we really need to control the formatting and output. But we didn't stop there, because even then, you might not have a valid output. So we actually passed it back into the graph schema and said, hey, is this a valid query? If it's not, then we just go and ask Gemini and say, hey, this wasn't a valid query. Here's the error message. Here's the query. Can you fix it for me?
This is amazing. You're using LLMs and Gen AI more like replacing humans. Like basically, rather than you interacting with the data and get the right schema to put into get the final query, you're using the LLM, pretty much replacing us in that sense. I hope not.
No.
Yeah, but overall, this is really, and I know, Kansh, you've been working with different customers. Is this a common pattern that you're seeing across many customers, like in terms of the components? Kevin was talking about the RAG piece, which is basically getting the relevant data, generating the query, and validating. What are the common patterns that you're seeing?
Those are essentially the common building blocks. So identifying like the schema, providing more context in the schema is very helpful. And then generating the SQL, in his case, it's the GraphQL, and validating through Gemini using a code chat Bison is really helpful. Most of the things what we have seen in this space is also making sure you are giving more business context, because the more crisp you are with the messaging, the accurate your SQL or your query or your GraphQL would be. So we suggest leveraging more context in the vector store to give more accurate responses. And the hallucination is real. It is going to be it is going to hallucinate some of the columns. So having more of the validation checks to make sure, is the column really exist? And if the column does exist, is it really needed? Or those kind of validation is really important. And the last part is also making sure we understand that this comes with a cost. Latency is a cost. Making sure the more, as Kevin had pointed out, he had highlighted a lot of LLMs he's using, and every LLM comes with a cost. So making sure it is needed in your workflow is important as we define how that architecture is going to evolve.
So I'm hearing different challenges that you folks are dealing with. Kevin, you mentioned the complexity and variety of schemas across different enterprises that are using Workday, as well as the size of the schema. It's large, so you have to tune it in a way, and prune it. And Kansh, you were talking about the latency and the accuracy side, which I assume some of that are solved, like you have done some solutioning probably to address the latency problem. If you can talk about like how you have solved that, or if there is still remaining challenges that still people have to keep in mind, as we go.
The accuracy challenges are real because the state of the art currently is 83%. And so we are trying to make it more and more accurate because the LLMs are probabilistic in nature and we are forcing it to become deterministic. So the way we are achieving that is providing more information. First is, do you really need a LLM? Say if it's a frequently asked question, say if what is my order status is going to be an application question, then maybe create a caching layer and store that. Do you really need a LLM to create that journey? And having more business context, like the way we were talking about. So maybe the column definition is not very descriptive, or maybe it doesn't have all the allowed values. So make it provide more information in the context layer, and also creating the validation layer more succinct. So currently the default is like 3 tries. Instead, make it like the number of tries you are eligible for, and give them a response saying, hey, we are not able to get to the answer. And the last thing which I really recommend is also resolving the ambiguity even before solving a problem, because sometimes the question itself was ambiguous and you're trying to solve the problem. So maybe try to understand what the problem is so that you can be very, you have broken down the components and you're able to execute.
And Kevin, is there anything you want to add in terms of the challenges that you're still trying to resolve?
Of course. And I think for us, the business context is probably the biggest challenge. Because we're allowing these external and customer developers to interact directly with the Workday graph. It turns out they don't always put perfect documentation about what they're adding. So we can ask our internal teams to document and understand, this is the purpose of that API. Our customer developers don't do that as much. So we kind of have to read their minds to understand what they're trying to accomplish if we want to help them with these queries. And so I think that's still a place of active research where we're trying to understand, okay, what is the best place to do this? And I think just to follow on Conch of yeah, we do absolutely have latency problems. And I think we've been framing it first as this was a task that may have taken 20 minutes beforehand, and now it's taking 30 seconds. But we absolutely can bring that down to give that faster insight based on your query.
You're not alone in that. Google is actively working on reducing the time in our models. So I'm hoping this will go really like classical ML that we were doing. We should keep an eye on that. I know we're kind of running out of time, but just to wrap up, a couple of things that are important to highlight, because some people might be wondering how you would even evaluate the impact of this kind of solutions. Anything that you want to highlight in terms of Workday, how you're actually getting to know, the quantifying the impact of it?
Yeah, and obviously, I think it's come up a lot of talks that it's very difficult. Not only do you have just a chance that the answer is not correct, but was it helpful in the first place? And so I think what we're doing is a key indicator that Workday Extend is looking at is how quick did the customer go from their application idea to their actually app running in production. And so that is what we're targeting. And I think even more than that, we can actually say, given that we generated this query, did they use it? And if the answer is yes, then we actually can say, absolutely. If we have a 50% success rate or 83% or more, we'll be extremely happy, and I think their users will too.
Awesome. Is there any last thing you wanted to say before opening it to the floor for Q&A? I wanted to ask you, it's what's next? But I've been pushed to open it to the Q&A. So maybe one of you guys can ask that question if you're interested to know what's next for them. But before that, anything you wanted to highlight that I didn't ask you?
So a couple of things which are coming, more asks which we are seeing, is also in the space of, how do I make it more for my solution, for my enterprise. And we are looking to see more, solution-based offerings. And I have the QR code. I think the QR code is there. So if you're interested in hearing more about the solution, please do, send us fill the form. We would be happy to share the code, which is available publicly, and you can test it out, give us feedback, and we'll make it better and better.